Good morning, everybody. This is our monthly workshop on Zoom for the San Joaquin County Master Food Preservers Group. And my name is Linda Driver, and I'm a Master Food Preserver since 2013. And today we're going to be talking about making jellies. And so one jelly that we're going to talk about is one that even a novice jelly maker could do. And the other one is one that gives you a little more flexibility and comes with a little bit higher level of difficulty, but certainly not beyond anybody's reach. So my partners in crime today are Maria Carmen and Colleen. And Colleen is going to go first, and her jelly is a jelly from juice. So Colleen, it's all yours.
All right. Let me change my name here. All right. And I have been a master food preserver since 2018. And I've been doing different canning things since I was a teenager. But I had never made jelly before, which a few of my cohorts thought was pretty funny because I make a lot of other things.
That would be me.
That would be her. So I picked the easiest way to make jelly. But before we get started with that, I want to go over a little bit on getting ready for that. So let me bring up my PowerPoint. And I'll share it. There we go. Did everybody see that? Linda, is it up?
Yep, it is up.
All right. All right. Okay. So we're talking about jellies today. You probably figured that out. And the first thing that I want to discuss is sanitizing and disinfecting. We need to make sure, one of the things that we learn when we become master food preservers is how important sanitation is in anything to do with food. And one of the simplest things we can do is sanitize all of our food contact surfaces. That means counters and utensils and anything that we're going to be using to make any meal or do any food preserving. If you take 1 teaspoon of bleach and add it to a quart of water and put it in a squirt bottle, you can sanitize your surfaces with that. Just squirt it on, let it air dry. It only takes a minute or two, and then that area has been sanitized. If you have other surfaces, if you have, for instance, your cutting boards and that sort of thing, you may want to use a different combination, which is 4 teaspoons of bleach to a quart of water. Wipe that on, and again, let it air dry. That will sanitize, because a lot of times we don't remember what it was that we used that cutting board for. So unless you have different cutting boards for different things, you want to, and you're mixing stuff, cutting different things on your surface, then you want to make sure that it is safe and sanitized. Another thing is wash up. We need to make sure our hands are clean. We need to not just our hands, but the back of our hands, up our arms a little bit, our fingernails. Fingernails are just bacteria holders underneath and around the cuticles. So use a fingernail brush and make sure all of your utensils that you're going to use are clean. Have clean towels, have clean dish rag, and a lot of things that, one thing that we do ask people to do when they're canning and stuff is to use a wet paper towel, not a dish towel, because dish towels are kind of like sponges. They just attract and hold on to all of the bacteria that you've wiped your hands on or whatever. So we want to use that. We want to wash our produce or vegetables, whatever we're using. We want to wet them with water, rub it surface, rinse under running water, and blot dry with a paper towel. Don't soak your produce or your vegetables or fruits, whatever you're doing. You don't want to soak them. If you think about it, if you put a bag of oranges, in this case, in your sink and you're going to wash them off, so you've got them all in this one sink full of all that bacteria is going from one to the other. It's floating around on the water. So you don't want to do that. So just rinse it and wipe it, and it's good to go. You don't need to use a soap or anything like that. Did I miss anything, Linda?
No, I think you have, did you put, I was looking at the participants. Did you put, to do it under running water?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good.
Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about the types of jellied products. A lot of us use probably incorrect terminology, but in our own home, it doesn't matter what we call it. So jellies are juices, fruit juices usually, that is mixed with sugar. They're clear or translucent, and they're firm enough to hold their shape, so that if you took a jar of jelly out and put it on a plate and lifted the jar, the jelly would sit there kind of like Jell-O and wiggle around. So my preference is jams, and jams are thick, sweet spreads. They hold their shape, but they're not as firm. And they're usually made from crushed or chopped fruits and then the sweetener, the sugar. Conserves are jams that are made with a mixture of fruits, and they usually include some citrus or raisins and nuts, sometimes coconut. Preserves are made of small whole fruits or uniform pieces of fruit, and it's in a clear, thick, slightly gelled syrup, so they're not as thick as jellies or jams. And marmalades are most often citrus. They are soft jellied, and they contain pieces of the fruit and pieces of the peel. And they're beautiful. They kind of sit around in the evenly suspended in the jellied part, and they're really quite a beautiful thing. But today we're going to be talking about jellies in particular. Now, the things that these have in common is fruit, and each fruit will have a unique color, flavor. It also has some of it has a slightly different texture. So you're going to get a different texture from the marmalade than you are from the jelly or the jam. It also has sugar or some type of sweetener. There's also a cross of pectin and acid, and that's what makes your jam or jelly what it is. You can even use just juice. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go farther. Let's see here, what's next? Pectin. Pectin is very important, and it's a substance that's in fruits. Some fruits have more pectin than others, and there's different kinds. I'm going to talk about, I have 4 here that I'm going to show you. They are not interchangeable. They have, what I have here today, whoopsie, is I have a low or no sugar I have a regular sugar pectin. Okay. I have a liquid pectin. Okay. And I also have, this is a low or no sugar pectin that you can buy in bulk. You can also get the regular pectin in this bulk size. Now, a lot of times I have heard that somebody made jam, but it was too sweet, so they just didn't add as much sugar as the recipe called for. And that is a huge red flag. That can end very badly. If you want to make jam, or jelly, and you want to use no sugar or less sugar, go for the no or reduced sugar box. It actually is quite a bit, just lost my train of thought there. There's quite a bit less sugar in here. We've done some taste tests. Linda did a strawberry jam taste test with it, and it has more fruit flavor because there's less sugar, but it also has a shorter shelf life. Jams and jellies made with the regular pectin can sit on your counter or in the cupboard after opening, but the low sugar, no sugar has to be refrigerated, and it will go bad faster than the regular. And that's because sugar is a preservative. It's not there just to sweeten, it's there to preserve your product. You don't want to make your jam or jelly and think it's too sweet, use less sugar, and then have it go bad. But do remember that they are not interchangeable. Each of these boxes comes with recipes inside. And if you are using those, and I have one here, we've got this nice recipe, whoop, upside down. It's got cooked jam, cooked jelly, quick and easy freezer jam, quick and easy freezer jellies. And then there's also directions on using low or no sugar, where you use sugar additives. Also, when you find a recipe that you want to in a recipe book, I have my ball book here. The recipe will tell you what type of pectin you need if you are using pectin. And I'll talk about that some more in a minute. Okay, acid. Acid is one of the important things in your jelly making, jam making. Commercial pectin products contain acids. Sometimes a recipe will call for lemon juice. You should always use bottled lemon juice unless you are making a marmalade or with oranges or lemons or something like that. If it calls for 3 tablespoons of lemon juice, you want to use the bottled, because the bottled lemon juice is guaranteed a certain amount of acid. So if I go out and pick a lemon off of my lemon tree, I don't know that it's going to have as much acid in it as the bottled lemon juice. The bottled lemon juice will be 5%. I don't know that my lemon off the tree will have that much acid. Maybe it'll have more acid. So you want to use the bottled lemon juice. And like I mentioned before, that sugar is a preserving agent. It combines flavor and aids in gelling as well. Most jams and jellies are made with granulated sugar, but you can also use corn syrup and honey. Honey and corn syrup can change the flavor of your product, but you want to make sure that if you're using these other things, honey and corn syrup or anything like that, that you use a recipe that calls for those ingredients. Jams and jellies aren't very forgiving. They have certain chemistry involved, and if you don't follow it correctly, then you may not end up with what you thought you were going to do. Tell a story about my son when he was moved out to go to college, and he'd been around with me making jam and stuff, and he had bought some berries and he decided he was going to make some jam. And he didn't have enough fruit, and he didn't have enough of this, and he didn't have enough of that, and he didn't know what he was doing on his own. So he was so proud, he called me and said, Mom, I made jam, but it's a little runny and there's not much flavor. And I asked him if he followed the recipe, and he said, well, sort of. So that's not good with jam or jelly. But I did applaud him at least trying. So remember not to reduce the amount of sugar. If you don't have enough sugar, if you don't have the sugar that it calls for, you could end up with moldy product. And even though jelly is a fairly easy product, you don't want to go to that work and end up throwing it away. All right. Here's some equipment and containers. So what you're going to need is you're going to need a large, heavy saucepan. Jams and jellies boil over if the pan isn't big enough. So you're going to get a pan and you're going to go, oh, well, that's not very much stuff in the bottom. Next time I'll use a smaller pan, and then the next time it boils over. So you need to be careful about that. So if you're making jelly where you are making the juice yourself, then you're going to need a jelly bag or some type of strainer that you can put cloth in to strain it. If you're not using a pectin in your jelly, then you're going to need a candy thermometer or a deep fat fryer thermometer. You want half-pint canning jars and lids. You want to make sure that they are in good condition. The last time I did some canning, I can't remember what it was for. I noticed that one of my jars was chipped, and I was quite surprised because I'm pretty careful with my jars. But they bounce around, and it just happened to have a little tiny chip, so I ended up throwing that away. I don't know why it broke my heart. I have a lot of jars, but it's like, you don't want to use them. And then to do the processing, you're going to need a boiling water bath or a deep cooking pot with a rack or a steam canner. And Linda will go into that a little more when she does her presentation. So this is just kind of the stuff that you will need for jelly making. If you are using juice like I did, you do not need a jelly bag, or you don't need to strain it. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay, you need to check your jars for chips and cracks. Make sure you wash your jars in hot soapy water and heat them. If your jelly processes for 10 minutes or more, you do not need to sterilize your jars. And that goes for anything that you're canning. If it's 10 minutes or more of processing, you don't need to sterilize it because it's going to be sterilized as it's processing. Make sure you have some place where you can let the jars sit for 12 to 24 hours after processing. They need to be away from any breezes. They need to just be there kind of out of the way. You don't want to move them. You don't want to pick them up and turn them upside down or, look at them. You don't want to tap the lids. You just want them to sit. And then you can get out the rest of your equipment. Now, my slide shows some things that you can use. Let's see here. The jar tightener is something that I would just toss. Never use that. My favorite things are the funnel. Linda doesn't use a funnel. She uses a measuring cup, but I'm not as neat as she is. So I use a funnel. The jar lifter is great for hot jars. And I have seen people use the handle to lift the jars instead of the bottom. You know, it works either way, but the actual part that goes over the jars is curved, so it grabs the jars better. The green stick here, if you notice that it's got kind of a zigzag at the bottom, and those are in 1/4 inch increments. So that's how you measure your headspace in your product. Mostly jams and jellies are 1/4 inch of headspace. I don't think I use tongs. And sometimes I'll use this little green stick down here. It is a magnet on the end, and you can get your lids. If you are heating them, most of you are probably used to heating your lids. We don't need to do that anymore, but this is what the little jar lifter, the lid lifter is for, so you don't have to put your hands into warm water. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about extracting juice. And this is for those of you who have grown your own fruit, or somebody gives you a box of peaches, say, and you want to make some juice. So this is how you do it. You place the juice in a flat bottom pan. You add some cold water, depending on the variety of fruit that you have. You may not need to add it if it's berries. You will certainly need to add.
Colleen?
Did you say something? Yes.
Yes. I think it's coming from you, but because I think everybody else is muted, but we're hearing some background noise.
Oh, okay.
And it's interfering with being able to understand you.
Okay. I will speak to my boy here.
That's what I thought it might be. Pardon the pause, people, but
yeah. If I catch him doing it again, I'll put him outside.
Yeah.
So
this can be edited out of the video. So
yeah. So when you do your fruit, depending on what kind of fruit you have, you will want. Hang on just a moment. Come on, Jack.
Okay. While Colleen is taking care of putting the dog in the other room, does anybody have any questions? You can ask questions on chat. And actually, right now, I'll take an opportunity because there's several questions I wanted to ask you. Can everybody chime in with where you are from? I always love to see how far we're reaching when we do these classes. So if you can go to chat and tell us where you're hailing from today. Oh, Maine and Sacramento and Modesto and Hayward and San Andreas, Cupertino, Oregon, Forest Hill, Northern Westchester, New York. Lovely. Chowchilla, Sioux Falls, Lodi, Santa Rosa, Concord, Fairfield, Colorado. Wow.
Wow.
Arkansas.
Okay. Dogs are out.
All right, dogs are out.
Dogs are out.
You're ready to go again. Okay.
Ready to go again. So before Jack interrupted us all, you want to put your fruit into a nice big saucepan that's flat on the bottom. You want to add cold water depending on what your fruit is, and your recipes should tell you how much to do. Some fruits won't need any water. You just need to watch them so that they don't scorch. You want to bring that to a boil on high heat, and you want to stir it. Once it comes to a boil, you want to reduce the heat. Berries and grapes need about 10 minutes, and hard fruits like apples will need 20 to 25 minutes, depending on the firmness of your fruit. You want to pour everything into a damp jelly bag, and you want to suspend it over a big measuring cup or another pot or a bowl, and you just want to let it sit there and let gravity pull the juice. If you squeeze the jelly bag, what you're going to do is you're going to get not clear juice because you're forcing some of the solids through the jelly bag. You can also use a fruit press to extract the juice, but then you should restrain it because you're still going to get some of the solids in there. One of the handouts that you'll be getting will go into that in greater detail. But like I said, you can also just buy a jar of 100% juice and use that, which is what I did. So here is what a jelly bag looks like. And remember that the clear juice comes from that has just dripped through the bag, not been squeezed. So this is going to take some time. You just let it sit there and drip through. If you don't get quite as much juice as you need, you can always add a little bit of water to the finished product to get the amount of juice that's necessary for your recipe. So the basic instructions for juice or for the jelly making is you need to combine the ingredients and cook one batch at a time. You don't want to change the amount that you make. You don't want to double batch it because it's faster, because it takes longer to cook it, because you've got double the product. So it's going to take longer to heat up. And then during that time, more of the water is going to evaporate. So then you're going to be losing some of your product. You also will be affecting the gel. So there's different, there's several reasons to not double the batch. And really, it doesn't take that long to make a batch of jam or jelly. You want to boil it rapidly for a clear finished product. If it's not boiled high enough, then it could be cloudy. If you're not using a recipe that calls for pectin, there are other ways to check the doneness of your jelly. And the recipes, or this little handout that I'm giving you, it doesn't really have recipes, but it has a lot of different ways to make jelly. There's not just one way. If you're using the commercial pectin, like this or whatever, it will have instructions. Follow the instructions very carefully. They vary for each one. All of these will make approximately the same amount of jam or jelly, but they all have different instructions. They have different amounts of sugar. They cook a little differently. So remember, these are not interchangeable. If you're using the commercial pectin, make sure you follow the instructions.
Colleen, I've been reinforcing what you've been saying on the chat because there've been questions about people who were unclear about recipes and stuff. So I don't think we can say too often, follow the recipe.
Follow the recipe, that's
and an
right.
Approved recipe.
Yes, and I'll talk about that a little bit too. If you want a softer product, my problem with jelly is that it's a little too gelled for me. That's why I like jam a little better. But if you add maybe a quarter to a half a cup more juice, then it'll be softer. And that's the only instance where I'm going to say that that's okay to do. And I'm saying that because what I, during my, it said you could do that. And this comes from Clemson University. So it's an approved recipe or information. You want to make sure that your jars are hot. So what I do is after I wash them, I put them in I use a steam canner, and I just let them sit there on low heat while I'm making my jelly. Then I fill them and they're hot. So I'm not putting hot product into a cold jar, which can lead to your jars breaking, cracking, and you don't want to do that. You need to adjust your processing time for your altitude. And any of these commercial pectins will tell you your recipes, if they're good, safe recipes, they will tell you if there's an adjustment that needs to be made and what it is for your altitude. After your after your jelly has processed for the amount of time, then you turn off the heat and you let it sit for 5 minutes. If you're using a water bath canner, you can take the lid off. If you're using a steam canner, you just let it sit there for 5 minutes. And what this does is it allows the jars to start to cool down a little bit. It's if you take your hot jar and you all of a sudden put it in a cool environment, your chances are pretty good your jars are going to crack. So by doing the 5 minutes, you are allowing the cooling process to start.
Colleen, another
Yes.
reason for letting it sit for the 5 minutes is everything was boiling before you turned off the heat. And it takes a little bit of time. The cooling process is letting some of that boiling stop happening.
Yes.
And so that there's not any motion going on inside the jar, because you've worked really hard to get a good seal on that
Right.
jar. And you want that seal to stay, so you don't want to disturb it.
Right.
And that's another one of the reasons for waiting, is to let that jar settle down so that seal is good.
You want to make sure when you take them out of the can or the pot that you're processing, that you lift them straight up, move them over, and put them straight down. And the reason for that is this seal is still in the process of sealing. The cooling off will create a vacuum, and that's what keeps the food safe. So you want to make sure that you don't get any of the jelly between the seal and the jar. That's why you want to make sure that you have some place to sit your jar for 12 to 24 hours. Then you can remove the bands. You don't want to store your jellies with the bands on. You want to take them off. Wipe your jar down and store in a cool, dark area. I have a basement where I put mine. If you put it in your garage, that may not be a safe place because your garage will get hot in the summertime. There's several methods to making jelly. You can make it with the added pectin. You can make without added pectin. You can use sugar or no sugar. You can use bottled juice, homemade juice, and jellies can be sweet or they can be savory. And the commonalities between them is that you need to measure your ingredients accurately, follow the manufacturer's instruction if using commercial pectin, and follow the recipe if you're not using commercial pectin or if you're not using sugar. And that the big thing here is follow the instructions. Some frequently asked questions on jelly is why make it in small batches? And we've covered that because if larger quantities, longer boiling is needed, and that can cause less flavor, darkening, toughening of jelly. You're not going to have as much jelly as the recipe says that you should end up with. Why boil rapidly? A long, slow boil destroys the pectin. So you want to get it done quickly. And what if there's mold? If you open a jar and there's mold on top, throw it away. It's not a family member. It's a jar of jam. Mycotoxins have been found in jars that have mold on the top, because you think, oh, that's just on the surface, I'm going to scrape that off. But no, it can grow through the jars and you just can't see it. So you want to be careful about that. And what can go wrong? Well, you can have runny jelly, and perhaps there's not enough pectin, or you didn't cook it long enough. What if your jelly is hard? Well, then you could have too much pectin, or you cooked it too long. What if there's bubbles? When you're filling the jars, make sure you don't use the foam that's on top. What I do is if there's foam, I scrape it off and I put it in I have a little jar that I put it in. It's fine, it's the jelly. So I can use it, but I don't want it in my jars. If you take a jar out of the cupboard and you notice that there's bubbles that are moving, that's an indication that there's fermentation taking place and it's caused by the jars not sealing. If your jelly is cloudy, that means, that your juice wasn't strained enough. If it's weepy, when you take it out, open it up and it's weepy on the top, there's juices, then it was probably stored in a warm place like your garage, or the acidity, there wasn't enough acidity, and which is most common in wine jellies. So you want to be careful with that. And with mold, jars are not sealed properly. So you want to discard all of the contents, which is another reason.
Go ahead and finish. I had a question from somebody.
Which is another reason why you want to make a half pint jars, which is what is recommended. It's a cup of jam. If you throw it away, it's not going to be a whole lot. Your question?
The question was, I've made jelly that the sugar is like crystallized. Why?
Okay, crystallized. I will tell you that in just a minute. There's a couple reasons for the crystallization. One is that the sugar wasn't dissolved all the way. Mm-hmm. So you should have cooked it a little bit longer. And another is if you scrape the pan, sugar on the sides of the pan is starting to crystallize. So if you mix that into your jelly when you are filling your jars, you've already started the crystallization.
Yeah, my remembrance from chemistry is that if a crystal starts to grow, it'll keep on growing.
Yes.
And so
I believe you are correct there. It doesn't mean it's bad.
It just means it's going to be crunchy.
Right. You might like crunchy.
Well, I was thinking you could sweeten your tea with it.
Yeah.
Because the hot tea would dissolve the sugar and you get the flavor. So
right. So here's some some reliable resources that we have for you. And I thank you for joining us. I did want to show a couple of things. I'm going to go back and leave this up a little bit while I'm talking. This is what I used to make my jelly. It's mango peach flavored juice, no sugar added, 100% juice. So this is what it looks like, and this is what my jelly looks like. They're almost exactly the same color, and it's really quite pretty.
Except your jelly is nice and clear.
Yes.
And pretty, and the juice is more cloudy.
Yes. And the sugar helps that keep it clear. I was going to say something about juice. If you make your own juice, if you are canning juice and you are going to sweeten it, make sure that you keep track of how much sugar is in that juice so you can vary the amount of sugar that goes into your recipe.
Yeah, and you should follow a recipe if you're making your own juice, follow it, because I make elderberry jelly, and for a long time I canned the excess in more than what I wanted to make during the season when the elderberries were ripe, and I canned the juice. And then Bill, our leader, found a article from an approved source that had tested the pH of elderberry juice and found that it wasn't acid enough to really go through that process. And so even though I never made anybody sick, never made myself sick, I have changed my practice. And so now I freeze my excess elderberry juice rather than can it. Because freezing is okay. Right.
I want to talk a minute about reliable resources. Just because you see something printed in a canning website or a Facebook canning group does not mean that it is a reliable and safe resource. I think it was last year or the year before, sometime during the COVID, we meaning the Master Food Preservers of San Joaquin County, one of us found a recipe in a national newspaper. I don't remember if it was the Times or the Washington newspaper, but they read the recipe and the recipe was bad. It didn't have, do you remember that, Linda?
Yes, I do. I remember one that was for salsa, but I think that people were using the open canning method, open kettle method.
Yes,
where
that's what it was.
Yeah. They just fill hot jars with hot product, put the lid on and let it sit there. They didn't have processing. And several of us had heart attacks.
Yes. So everything that a master food preserver recommends recipe-wise has been tested through the government agencies, the universities. They have been tested. They didn't just make a batch, they made a lot of batches and tested for safety. We don't want to make anybody sick, and we don't want to, our grandparents canned a certain way. They canned the way that they learned. But with all things, canning practices have changed, and they've learned more and more things that can affect the safety of it. And it's much better to err on the side of safety than it is to, well, that's how grandma did it. Well, You know, I remember as a child, my grandmother put the paraffin on top. And so we'd pry off the paraffin, and sometimes there'd be mold underneath and sometimes there wouldn't. So we can't, the only thing that we can tell you is we cannot recommend a recipe or resources that have not been proven.
Right.
Okay.
And we can say that all of us who did all those practices are lucky because we are all still alive.
Yes. And also takes us once.
Yeah, all it takes is once, and that is true. So I'm going to ask you all to pardon my voice today because it's kind of, my throat is a little rough. I don't know why. But I think we answered all the questions as we were going, Colleen.
Okay. I will watch.
Okay. Let's see if I can get, okay, I need to make that closed. Okay. And you've got the comm on the chat box.
Yes,
So,
I do.
Actually, maybe before my voice disappears all over, and while everybody's still here, because at least one person said they needed to leave early, we probably will be sending out a survey to everybody who is on our list and anybody who's ever attended a class, because we are now loosening up and we have been given permission to have in-person classes again. And so since we've been given that permission, we think that we need to do that because there is there's doing in person is a different way of learning, and it's for the people who are close enough to do it. So we will need to do those on Saturdays, which means we'll need to find, but don't panic, those people who are far away and like the Zoom, because we decided we like Zoom too. Because we found that it's a really good way to get the message out and get safe practices out, and that's our mission. So we'll be needing to find another day. So we'll be sending out a survey, but if you have comments you want to make right now, we'll probably be, my guess is it'll probably be a weekday, and it'll probably be a weekday early evening, but I don't know how that works for everybody. So if you have a comment about it, let us know what you think. But we will be putting together some survey questions and sending them out. And if you would, we'd really appreciate the feedback, because it helps us make sure that we're out there when somebody can actually benefit from it. And let's see, if you are a person who is close enough to San Joaquin County, if you're already in San Joaquin County, or you're close enough to that you could attend in-person class, would you be interested in doing that? So if you could answer those things in the chat, that would be really good. And let's see, I need to share screen, and I need to go over and get my PowerPoint. And then I need to change it to slideshow, right? Yo, okay, can you see my jelly?
Can't
Colleen?
see you,
Yes,
but I
Linda,
see your
we
jelly.
can see it.
You can't see the jelly?
I can.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start. And my jelly is one that's unusual, because usually you hear us say, you heard Colleen say it, I didn't count how many times, but I'm sure you heard her say more than once, follow the recipe. And we say it over and over and over again, because the recipes we tell you you can use have been tested. That means that somebody has spent the time and money to make that recipe. I don't know how many times, but a whole bunch of times. And then they process the jars, and then they wait a certain amount of time, and then they go into the jar and they take a sample out of it and they test it. And if there's no botulism in the jar and it's okay, then after they've done this, I'm going to guess 200 times, but probably it might be more. It could be a lot. When they've got to that point, then they can say, this is an approved recipe. If you make it and you follow the directions, you're not going to make yourself sick, and you're not going to make anybody else sick. And that is one of our goals, is to save this food, make it into a usable thing that you will enjoy, and have confidence that it's going to be safe to eat. That is what we want. Nobody wants to make somebody sick. So everything Master Food Preservers does is geared towards trying to make sure that what you do is safe. Okay, so that was the end product of the jelly that I made. And it is a fresh herb jelly. And what makes it unusual, boy, my voice is going bad fast. What makes it unusual is that you have some flexibility in it. It's an herb jelly. And so the recipe says 2 cups of loosely packed, coarsely chopped herbs. Okay. That means that everybody who's listening to this could go out and collect some herbs, and nobody would have the same jelly as somebody else. Because what herbs do you want to put in? Well, it depends on what you want to do with it. You could make mint jelly. You could make this one. I call it my Scarborough Fair. How many people know what is in this jelly? This is Scarborough Fair jelly. All of us of a certain age certainly know what's in this jelly. It has a melody that goes with it: parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. And so that's this. The other thing that you have flexibility on with this jelly is you can make it with apple juice, unsweetened apple juice, or white wine. So I decided to make it with white wine. So right now we've got an infinite number of possible outcomes and one approved recipe. And I'm going to go fast over the safety things because Colleen did a great job on that. Okay. As you can tell, these pictures were taken in my kitchen. And so that pan that's on the stove is a really deep frying pan. It's about 4 inches deep. And it is my favorite pan to make jelly in or jam, because most of the time, the amount that you're getting out of a jelly or jam recipe is somewhere between 5 and 8 jars, 8 cups. And that works in that pan. You can have it at a full rolling boil and not boil over, but it's not a huge thing to deal with. But it's better to go with the big pan if you're not sure. I knew, especially with this jelly, I knew it would fit in that pan. And that pan has a cover. So in this recipe, needed a pan with a cover. Measuring cups. That thing in the middle is this thing. Now, if you're going to be a person who is making lots of jelly, and you're going to be making lots of jelly from juice yourself, you want one of these. Or if you're just a nutcase who likes to preserve food, you want one. I own 2. And I didn't buy either one of them new. I bought both of them at garage sales or estate sales. And didn't pay very much money for it. And as you can see, there's a blue piece of tape on the side here with my name on it, which means that when I take it to classes we're teaching and stuff, I get it back. And in order to make that work too, you need to line it either with cheesecloth or a straining bag. A word to the wise, this is the extra large size straining bag. If you want to do this, and it's easy and fast, the place to buy this is not in the canning section. The place to buy this is in the paint section at your favorite paint or big box store, because this is what the painters use to strain paint with. It's exactly the same thing that you buy in the canning section, but it costs about half the price. So if you want a jelly bag, the paint section is the place to go. You could also use, and I did use for many, many years, a tea towel. You can take and put a tea towel over a colander and strain your juice that way. It works. On a spoon, got my jar lifter there. And on the far right is my steam canner, which I used to be a water bath person. And it took me a while to decide to buy a steam canner. And I am now a steam canner lover because it uses less water, but I'll talk about that more later. Okay, gather your ingredients. And I make these things as 2 slides because you want to have all the stuff you're going to need to work with, and you want to have all the stuff you need for ingredients. It's a real pain in the patoot to get halfway through your recipe and realize I don't have any white wine vinegar. And you have to stop and go to the store and get the white wine vinegar because that was the thing you didn't have enough of. So you want to make sure that you have everything that's on the list ahead of time. So all that stuff that's on my breadboard there, I've got the pectin, I've got the wine, got the white wine vinegar, I've got the collection of herbs that I went out and cut from my yard, and I have the sugar. So those were the things that I needed to make this recipe. So you chop up the herbs. You get 2 cups. And one of the things that the recipe tells you to do is it says if you're using something that's really strong, such as rosemary or savory, you might want to cut down the amount. It says 2 cups loosely packed, coarsely chopped. And both of those things, those instructions are important. Loosely packed, coarsely chopped is going to be a lot less herbs than finely chopped and tightly packed. And so you want to try to follow it because you might have something that was overpowering if you had cut it real small and you shoved it in the jar. Also, if you're using the rosemary, it says cut it down to, I think, 1.5 cups instead of 2 cups. Since rosemary was only one of the herbs that I was putting into the recipe, I used the same amount, but I didn't use as much rosemary as I did parsley. I think volume wise, parsley took up the most room in that cup, that measuring cup. And I had sage, and that probably was next. And then the rosemary, and then the thyme, because it's such little leaves, it didn't take up much room at all. So you chop it up, you put it in with the liquids, you bring it to a boil, and then you turn it off. You remove it from heat, just turn the heat off, put the cover on and let it sit for 15 minutes. You want all those herbs to let all their flavor go into the liquid that's in the pan. So after you've done that, you've let it sit for that long, you now want to pour it into your strainer. And this can be a colander, like I said, a colander with cheesecloth or a tea towel over it. Pour the stuff in the colander, in the strainer, and let it drain on its own, undisturbed. So while it's doing that, you're going to go work on the jars and getting other things done. But you want to just let it drip on its own. And when it gets done, you're going to use 3¼ cups of juice. And that's why you want to make sure when you bring it to a boil that you don't let it boil for a long time. One of our classes we had once, we were making pepper jelly, and the process was the same. You had a liquid, and I think it was just water that time, but you had a liquid, and you were supposed to put the peppers in, and you were supposed to let them heat, and then you were supposed to strain it. Well, some people managed to boil it away to where they had like 1/4 cup of pepper juice. And you're not going to make much of a batch of jelly with 1/4 cup of juice. You need more than that. So as soon as you get it in there and it all gets hot, you turn it off and let it steep. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, you prepare and the way I like to get my jars hot is I put some water in them. I sit them in my steam canner, and I put the lid on the steam canner, and I let them come up and get really nice and hot so that I know I can use them. And that doesn't take too long. So after you've got your juice, that's herb juice that you're looking at in the pan, you pour in the pectin, and that's the pile of pectin there. And you whisk it in until it's dissolved, and then you bring it to a boil over high heat, stirring frequently. And there's a lot of stirring involved with jelly. I always tell people I've been making jelly at this point in time, I've been making jelly for 70 years. I've been making jelly since I was old enough to stand on a chair and stir. And back in the olden days, you had to stir for 3 minutes, which seemed like forever, especially on a hot summer day in a house in Stockton cooled by a swamp cooler. That gives a new meaning to hot. Anyway, once you have done that, once you've brought it up to a boil and you had it to a full boil, now you dump the sugar in, and you should always have your sugar already measured. And in a bowl,
Linda,
yeah.
how much sugar?
This recipe was 5.25 cups of sugar.
Okay, thank you. That was a question.
Okay, this is a small recipe. It only makes 5 cups of jelly, so it doesn't need as much. You don't have as much to start with because you're making a smaller batch. So you add the sugar all at once, and you bring it back to a full rolling boil. And I made it an asterisk there because a lot of people haven't heard that terminology before. A full rolling boil is one that cannot be stirred down. So you're not there yet if you can stir it down. When it's boiling all over the pan and you're stirring like mad and it's still boiling all over the pan, you are now at a full rolling boil. And you can either stand there and count 1, 1,000, 1, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000 for your minute, or you can have a minute timer that I turn over, and that gets to the right amount. You don't want to boil it too much because you can actually break the gel by cooking it too much. And so you want to follow the recipe. More is not necessarily better. So as you can see, when it's at a full rolling boil in my pan, I still have room at the top of the pan. Not a lot, but I have room. Yeah. Okay, so once you've done that, and one of the tips, I didn't see it on this recipe, but one of the accepted tips for keeping foam down, because as you can see, there's a lot of foam because it's boiling. One of the ways to keep the amount of foam down is to put about a 1/4 teaspoon of butter or margarine in your mix, and that will help calm the top so that it's easier to skim. And like Colleen, I skim the top of my jellies and my jams off to get them clean and pretty. And I put the skimming part in a little bowl, and that goes on my toast the next morning. So I use it up, and it tastes good. You don't want it in your jar because you want your jar to be pretty. So you've got the hot jars. You pour the jelly into the hot jars. You leave a 1/4 inch headspace. That's just down from the top. And that's what that headspace measuring is for. And you wipe the rim if you got anything on there. And like Colleen said, I have mastered the trick of being able to scoop up a 1 cup measuring cup and pour it in my jar. And I rarely, knock on wood, I rarely make a mess. It usually all goes right into the jar, and I don't like messing with that funnel. So this is easier for me. Anyway, you wipe the rim, center the lid on the jar, and screw the band down. And I always say, you screw it down. It's called finger tight, and that means old lady Linda Driver finger tight, not young, strong 25-year-old guy finger tight. So you don't want to put a whole lot of leverage on it. You want it to be tight, but you don't want to break the jar. I'm not sure you could break the jar that way. Place the jars in the canner. Okay, now if you're using a water bath canner, and yes, I do own 2 of them and have given away so many, I don't know how many I've given away over the years, but they come with a rack on the inside, And they're big enough to hold, I think 7-quart jars, which is pretty big. You can, if you're new to making jelly and you want to make jelly and you don't particularly want to spend the money on a canner at this point in time, you can make your own. All you need is a pot that is deep enough that you can put your jars in on a rack of some sort. And the rack can be anything from a cake cooling rack. I've got one of those that's round that will fit in the bottom of most saucepans. You can make yourself a rack by taking the rings that you hold on the top of the jars with. And if you take several of these and you tie them together with wire ties, you can make a rack that can fit the bottom of your pot, and you can set the jars on top of it. Or you can, I also have a pasta pot that I used for years, was great for small batches of stuff because it came with a strainer built in. And so you could sit the jars on the inside the strainer and then fill it up with water. And then when you wanted to do it, you just lifted the inside part up. And so that works. So if you are a new person who wants to try making some jelly and don't want to invest a ton of money, you don't have to. You can make yourself a water bath canner using any of those methods. All you need, if you were doing this jar, you would need to have it up on something that lifted it off the bottom of the pot. You don't want it sitting on the bottom. And so if it was sitting on top of this thing, and you want at least 1 inch of water, but usually 2 is better, over the top. So you would need something you would need to be able to have 6 inches of water in this pot. And that would work. So you can make jelly even without spending a whole lot of money on equipment. There's the one place where these things go different is when you're doing a water bath canner. Both canners process the product for 10 minutes. But they also have a 5-minute wait time, but you do the 5-minute wait time differently. If it's a water bath canner, because all of the water that was in that canner was boiling. So what was inside the jar was at a boil, everything that was around the jar was at a boil. So when you're done with the 10 minutes, you turn it off and you take the lid off and you let it sit for 5 minutes. And then after has sat for 5 minutes, now you remove the jars with that jar lifter. And like Colleen said, you go straight up and straight over and straight down. No sloppy business, straight up and straight down. Now, if you have a steam canner, the reason why the steam canner became my favorite canner is because you only have to fill up the bottom part of this with water. And in water-stressed California, every Californian who has a conscience tries to save water. This is one place where you can save water because you're filling it up there's about 1 inch of water down there. And you're going to sit the jars on top of this rack that's in the canner like that. And then you put the lid on. And when you put the lid on, for the brand that I have, there is a vent hole right here in the backside, and you always want it away from you, not towards you. The manufacturer's name goes towards you. You put the lid on, you turn on the heat, and you wait until you see a steady column of steam coming from that vent hole in the back. And on the top, there is a gauge. And when the gauge gets into the green, because I'm at sea level, that's when you start counting your processing time, and not until. And so it makes it really easy. It is easy to use. And you would learn I haven't done it at another altitude, so I haven't had to figure out how to use the altitude thing. When when you've done your 10 minutes with this, once it's reached the green part of the thing and you're counting your processing time, when it gets to the end of the 10 minutes, you turn off the heat, just like you did with the water bath canner. But you don't remove the lid, because that would be a shock, because it's all of a sudden you would go from the processing temperature inside there to your room temperature. You don't want to do that. That's too much. So you wait 5 minutes for things to settle down inside. And then after you've waited the 5 minutes, then you can pull it off. A quick hint to anybody. I passed this along to my master food preserver friends. As you can see, mine's not pretty and pristine. It's used. Don't drop it. I dropped it a couple of weeks ago, and then I found out that I didn't realize that when I dropped it, it was in the box. The top got bent out of round. So I had to spend a little time loving it in the right directions to get it back to round so that it fit and made a seal. So once you have waited the 5 minutes, then you take the top off, then you remove the jars, cool, and store them. And once again, there's some of our approved sources. And the jar you get for this jelly looks like this. And you say, okay, what do I do with an herb jelly? That was one of my questions when I first ran into these. They're great over cheese, like a soft cheese. They are also really good to make a glaze for roasted meat. So fish, chicken, ham. I'm going to try this on my Easter ham and see what it does for my Easter ham this year. So that's what you do with a savory jelly. And you can have as much fun as long as you don't have more than 2 cups of loosely packed, coarsely chopped herbs. You can play with your herbs till your heart's content. So if you want to use basil, if you want to use sage, you want to use savory, whatever you want to use that is an herb that you like to cook with, this is a way to get some more flavor into your cooking. So any questions?
There's one in the chat about could you make a hot herb pepper jelly?
Yes. In this book that you and I both mine for recipes, and hers looked much neater. I bought one that I keep clean and pristine. And if you take a look at mine, you can see all of the post-it notes. It's almost becoming and different recipes end up with stars on them if I made them and I like them. And there are hot pepper jellies. There's one on the next page is a balsamic red pepper jelly, and there's a roasted garlic jelly, and there's a sun-dried tomato jelly, and there's an easy jalapeno jelly, and there's a habanero gold jelly, and red pepper and garlic jelly, and a curry raisin jelly. And that was just out of one place. So yes, there are recipes for making pepper jelly and all kinds of savory jellies. Jellies are not just, I probably make more. Do I make more jelly? I'm about half and half. I make, and here's the difference for me. It's not an exclusive thing, but if it's a thing that like elderberries would be a stupid thing, in my opinion, to try to make jam out of, because there's so many seeds and it's such a little berry that it would not make sense. Because when you make elderberry jelly, and I do every single year because they become ripe, they grow in my backyard and they become ripe on the week that 4th of July is in. But it involves picking the elderberries, and then it involves several hours of sitting and stripping the berries off of the stems, because you don't want the stems in your juice because they are bitter. And so you will sit and you do this outside it's important to do it outside because the berries are about 1/4 inch in diameter and they are purple. And if you try to do them inside, you're going to have purple things, places you don't want purple things. And so it's much easier to do it outside, sitting in a chair in your backyard. And then if the purple things happen to go someplace other than the bowl, it doesn't really matter. So elderberries would be stupid to try to make jam out of. Strawberries would be stupid to try to make jelly out of, as far as I'm concerned, because the whole thing about the strawberry is the whole strawberry is part of the thing. You're not just going for the flavor. I mean, you could make strawberry jelly, but it's much better. It's much better as a jam. So it depends on what it is you're dealing with, what thing, and some things can be used for both. Apples can make jelly, but you could make an apple butter that's very much like a jam and be happy with that. So it depends on what the thing is. I'm trying to think of the other things that would not. Pomegranates would be stupid as a jam. Pomegranates really only could be jelly. And that's another thing that is a very labor intensive job, to get all the little pips out and not any of the white, because the white tastes bad. So
but you can buy a bottle of 100% pomegranate juice.
Right. But it depends on whether you're a purist or not.
That's true. That's true.
Anyway, so some things naturally lean towards one method of preservation more than another, and you'll figure that out as you go along. Some things that are peaches seem to be better for jam to me than they would be for jelly. But if you had peach juice, it would make a pretty jelly, but it just seemed like you would lose a lot. So anyway, I think that's it, unless people have questions. And we're done. Do we have
I've been answering, so.
Okay.
The name of the book?
Oh, yeah, it's the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving.
Yes.
And it is important to be either the 2012 or 2006 version, because those are the ones that we can say, that we as master food preservers can say have the recipes have all been tested. I think there is a later version, but we don't use that for teaching.
Yeah. You might say why.
Well, the why is if you're, like I said, when you are testing a recipe, it takes a lot of work. And I think somebody told me once that it costs about $50,000 to $100,000 for testing, because you're generally paying somebody who's working on their doctorate to run all the tests and everything. And it takes a lot of tests, and it takes scientific accuracy. When we say as a master food preserver, if I say this is an approved recipe, it means that I have been assured that this has been tested, and that the testing has proven that if you follow the directions and you do it as it says, you will have a safe product. And
Right.
That is our goal, is that you could I could hand you this jar, you could open it and use it and know that you were not going to get sick. And that's really important. Any of us who have been sick with food poisoning didn't appreciate it. And some forms of food poisoning, and the forms that come with canned products, is botulism. And botulism you don't recover from generally, unless the doctor figures out what it is really quick. And we hear scary stories about people who can things and feed it, don't follow the recipe, and then feed it to somebody and somebody dies. And I don't ever want that to be me. And I don't.
Colleen, sorry, can you, one of you can add the name of the book on the chat, that way people can.
I'll do that.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So, and this list of approved sources that we have here. If you go to any of these sites, and the one that's a go-to for anybody, has lots and lots of sources, is the National Center for Home Food Preservation. Anything you get from these, if you're getting it from a university extension, it will be something that's tested. They won't be publishing anything that isn't tested. And so, if you find it there and follow the directions, that you will be making something safe. So I think that that's the most important thing we can do. And I really think that I've got aprons that say Master Food Preserver, but I really think we ought to have aprons that just say, follow the recipe.
Yeah.
And for those of us who are master gardeners, we need one that says, it depends. Because all of our answers start off, well, it depends. But as master food preservers, our most common phrase is follow the recipe, and you use a safe recipe, not one. It's in this day and age of the internet, one of the things that I think most schools do a job on, and those of us who are older need to learn, is to be able to tell the difference between a reputable source and a non-reputable source when we're doing things. And that thing that was for the salsa that was in the newspaper, I read that article, and I wrote instantaneously from my chair where I was reading the paper. I wrote a note to the editor of that section of the paper about how can you do this? And apparently I was not the only one. And the next time that particular blogger was featured in the paper, he said something about those food preserving Nazis or something. But at least the recipe he gave that day, he gave correct instruction for. So it served a function, because I hate to think of his recipe was for 24 jars of salsa. Nobody makes 24 jars of salsa they're going to eat tomorrow. And they're making 24 jars of salsa. You're putting it on the shelf to use, and to have a recipe that could make people sick is not a good thing.
And salsa is the #1 home canned product that is not canned using a approved recipe, and that goes bad.
I didn't know that, but it makes sense, because everybody has a favorite salsa.
Right.
And what we tell you, this is not on salsa, but what I will tell you is what we tell people: if you have a favorite family recipe, whether it's for salsa or jelly or whatever else, but it's grandma's recipe, look at the ingredients and then go through the approved sources and find a recipe that has pretty much the same ingredients, and use that recipe, because the quantities that they give you, the processing times will be tested, and you'll have something that's pretty much like grandma's recipe, but you won't have to worry about it. And you don't want to be the person making grandma's recipe and miss a step. So, okay. So if we don't have any more questions, all of you who are in the class will get an email, I think probably next week, and with a link so that you can see the video if you want to again, and it will have the recipes and the sources and stuff available to you so that you can get them. But we wanted to do this early enough that should you want to make, my copywriting skill came out with the thought that the jelly that Colleen went through would be great for your spring holiday breakfast table. And I was thinking that making your own herb jelly that you can use for a glaze would be a nice change up for whatever your holiday main course was. So
that reminds me, Linda,
mm-hmm.
for those that may have attended the class last month where we did the yogurt and the sauerkraut. I just wanted to let them know that we had sauerkraut that I made that day for St. Patrick's Day, and it was delicious.
And I got to tell you, I made sauerkraut after that. And I've got to find out if my daughter likes sauerkraut, because guess what? I still don't like sauerkraut. But
Linda and Colleen, I just see a question on the chat that I don't know if it was answered, but it says,
Sure.
Ginger, so my old core canning book that tells me how to can milk out of the cow is something that I shouldn't use?
probably.
So I just to make it clear and they know.
Yes.
That I haven't ever seen that recipe. So yeah, I'm gonna say that's probably not good.
I have a ball book from, I think it's like 1935. And it's interesting to look at.
Yeah. Well, I find it interesting, and I didn't mention this, but when I did say I've been making jelly for 70 years. When I went through my training, I learned things that made me change my practice. And actually, one of the things that can go wrong with making jelly that I was guilty of was saying, well, I've got enough juice here to make 3 batches of elderberry, or 2 batches of elderberry jelly. So I'll just make them all at once. And sometimes the gel set and sometimes it didn't, and if you make a jelly and it doesn't set, the worst case scenario is you've got a really good flavored syrup,
Right.
that you can use on pancakes or ice cream. But one of the things that I learned when I did my master food preserver training was that you're doing chemistry. And part of the chemistry is how long it takes to heat something up to a temperature and how long it takes to cool it down and everything else. And so that is why you make 1 batch of jelly at a time. You don't double batches, because even though you want to make the end product, you make it in 2 separate batches because you're doing chemistry. And if you change the volume, you change the heating time and you've changed the chemistry. And so when you learn things that make you change your practice, I would call that significant. And for me, that was significant. And, I spent years pouring paraffin on top of jars. And I'm trying to think when I don't remember when I started using a water bath canner, but I can remember all that jelly I was making while I was standing on the stool. We put into jars and we put paraffin on the top. That means it wasn't processed. And, that was 70 years ago. So anyway, the yogurt class, I don't know if it's available to everyone. It might be. When you get the instructions for this one, see if you can see it.
It may be on YouTube.
Yeah, it might be, and make sure it's, if YouTube is one of those things too. Everybody uses YouTube these
Right.
days. But when it comes to food preserving, make sure that whoever did the YouTube is actually somebody that you can trust. And that means somebody who's a master food preserver or somebody who is with one of the university extension things, but not just somebody who thought it would be fun to make a YouTube video.
Right. But yeah, we have ours on YouTube. We also, if you go to, I think the website will probably have a link to that as well.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. It says, somebody's asking about the ball canning book. It's copyright 2000. Okay. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, Maria Carmen or Colleen, but I don't think that if it's the one that's that has the 2015 and 2020 dates on it is one we can use. Is that correct?
I think that the 2015 we can.
Okay. But if it says 2020, probably not. And the reason for that is not that we don't have assurance that every recipe in the book was tested. And if we don't have that assurance, we can't say use it without worry. And so that's part of the problem with that. And so I think you probably can find the yogurt instructions there, but like I said, look and make sure that it's if it's ours, it's going to say Master Food Preservers of San Joaquin County on it. Okay. And I don't know, I was talking, so I wasn't following. Did people give feedback about what day you would prefer to have Zoom classes?
I read about
No, I didn't see anything.
I just read about some people will be willing or they're going to be able to join the in-person classes. For other ones that live far away, they appreciate that we keep the Zoom classes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're in agreement. We want to keep doing the Zoom classes because it allows us to reach people who wouldn't have access maybe. And I don't think there's a difference between, I see one question here about the Sure-Gel and MCP. I don't think there's a difference in quality. I've been using Sure-Gel my whole life, so that's what I use.
I've used both.
I have used both, but if
The difference that I have noticed with the ones that I've used, that sometimes there's different amount of pectin in the box by weight.
yeah, but
quality, no.
I think it was in the instructions for this recipe, was somewhere I was reading that no matter what, if you're following, it doesn't matter if the recipe says boxed pectin, it will work because it's a matter of how they formulated the pectin and what,
Yes.
and everything else. But if it says a box of pectin, if you use a box of pectin, you're going to be good.
Yeah.
So not to worry about how many ounces it has, because you're going to get the same amount of gelling out of it.
Right. Just to make sure that if it calls for liquid, you use liquid pectin. If not, then you use the powdered.
And let's see, do you see something I'm missing here?
It says here that the Home Preserving Book of 2020 has recently been approved by Sue Mosbacher.
Okay, well, that's good. I'm gonna, that's good news. Sue is one of our go-to gurus.
Yep.
And so that's really good. And that frees up a lot of stuff, because I have made, I think there's like 400 recipes in this book, and I've probably made or had part of I'm gonna say at least 100 of them. We're very excited here in San Joaquin County because we're going to get to go back to having in-person meetings for Master Food Preservers, and all of us are, yay. And one of the things we do sometimes is distribute recipes, and everybody makes a different one, and then we can find out which ones we like, which is a cool thing.
And they're sharing also about the Zoom classes in different counties. They say Sacramento and Amador County have classes on the first and the third Wednesday of the month, and Humboldt is the third Thursday.
Yeah.
So just take in consideration for our own classes or Zoom classes.
Yeah. Well, we'll probably, one of the overriding factors will probably be when the 3 or 4 of us that do this want to do it and are available is going to be one of the huge factors, because we're a very small group, and the group that does the presentations is even smaller. So, okay, so I think we're done. So
I think so.
thank you everybody for coming.